I'm really bad with these things, so if you can't hear, shout. Um, okay, how's that? Better? Okay, okay. All right, I'm not here to tell you that Scotland is entitled to self-determination because you know that or you wouldn't be here. And I'm not here to tell you why it's more urgent than it's ever been to get out from under a corrupt, inhuman, rogue state, which has been killing our people for 300 years and is going to kill a whole lot more this winter. We know the what and we know the why. But the elephant in the room, the one our politicians aren't so clear on, the one we're all a wee bit nervous about, is how. How do we get out of this destructive, oppressive, tyrannical, killing union? Because the British establishment cannot afford to let Scotland go. Let's be really clear about that. There is no way that we are going to force them to surrender our country using their rules on their playing field, playing their game. And here we are, just trying to get them to agree that we can play the game again. Now, I could stand here for hours and tell you about the things that the British establishment has done to keep Scotland firmly in its grasp, the ways it has rewritten the law, misrepresented the law, committed fraud, fakery, hidden the truth. But I've got 5 minutes. So instead, I'm going to remind you what happened in 2014. This is our wake-up call. We want a referendum? Well, hang on. The referendum we had was conducted supposedly once in a generation, a binding referendum, and what happened? 2 weeks before the final vote, they broke the Edinburgh Agreement. And they promised in a vow that if Scotland voted no, it would get Devo Max, something close to federalism, and would be safely nestled into Europe. Then, all the way through, when the media should have been monitored to make sure it was 50-50, that people got both sides of the argument, what happened? We got more like 80-20 in favour of the union. On the day of the vote, there were no exit polls. The ballots were destroyed shortly thereafter. We collected evidence of rigging. A postal ballot that was impossible, and bags full of fake ballots that had been handed over by whistleblowers. We thought we could get a judicial review, but we couldn't, because this was an opinion poll. For all they said it was binding, it was a consultative referendum, and you can't get a judicial review for something that's just an opinion poll. And having rigged it, they told us that was it. We'd had our chips. That's what we get. Now that is what we're up against. When we start talking about a referendum, that's what we all have to be aware of. Even if they agree that we have the right to it, they'll never let us win it or a plebiscite. So that's the bad news. The good news is that the British establishment's game is not the only game in town. When people talk without meaning it about how the people of Scotland are sovereign, they may not mean it, but they're right. We are. Here's a story. Back in the 80s, something called the Scotland UN Committee started lobbying and pushing international members, international countries, to pressure the British government to obey international and domestic law. And they brought enormous pressure to bear. At the same time, something called the Scottish Constitutional Convention came into being, and they got a motion onto the floor of the House of Commons. You all know that. You know that one? It says that the people of Scotland are sovereign and have the right to determine the form of government best suited to their needs. Now, here's a funny thing. The Scottish Convention, Constitutional Convention, wasn't a parliament. It had no legal power. That statement wasn't an act. It had no legal power. So why do you think that the whole of the union establishment didn't turn up on the benches in the House of Commons and jeer and shout and vote it down? You ever asked yourself that question? Why? The reason is they couldn't. They couldn't because the Claim of Right of 1989 reaffirmed Scotland's Claim of Right Act of 1689. And by the way, you know all those nasty sectarian bits? They're not law anymore. They don't apply. But the bit that does apply, the bit that says the Scots are sovereign, that's a condition of the Union. And the reason they didn't turn up to vote it down and shout and jeer and boo the way they do is because they couldn't. Because if they'd voted it down, they'd have ended the Union. That's the power we've got. Today, Salvo is doing everything we can to explain to people what the Claim of Right really means. It means you are sovereign over Westminster. And as Kenyon Wright said at the time, he thought a lot of people that signed up to it didn't understand that either Westminster is sovereign or the people of Scotland are sovereign, but it can't be both. So what we're proposing to do is first make people across Scotland aware that it doesn't matter what party you support or if you support no party. As a Scot, you're sovereign. As a Scot, you are entitled to the protection that is given by the Claim of Right. That is the only thing that got any progress, that got us devolution, because it is still law, and that we can do two things. We can make sure everybody in Scotland is demanding what we have a right to, and all that comes with it. And we can launch an international campaign. We're doing that too. If you haven't done so, sign up to Liberation Scot. You might have to try 10 times. Just keep trying. We're going to get a movement together that can go to the UN and that can get a final ruling. Is Scotland a colony? Or is Scotland a nation in a voluntary political union with a right to all the terms and conditions that were agreed, which includes the right to determine the form of government best suited to our needs? That is law. And it only requires that we go outside the Westminster system, that we form this movement, that we inform our people, and most of all, that we come together. Because sovereignty means all of us. It doesn't mean SNP or Alba or Green or Liberal or Labour. It means all of us. We can do this, and we can hope that our politicians will get behind us instead of asking us to get behind them while they try to beat Westminster and a 300-year-old game that we've never won on their playing field yet. We can win it. We can win it together. And maybe the way to do it is to remember where sovereignty comes from. There's an ancient Scottish system called the Duchess, comes out of the clans, where we began. And it says that we're all kin. It says that nobody rules over anybody else, nobody's a subject, because we're family. That's where it comes from. So maybe we can start to treat each other like family. Families fall out. Families get to the point where they can't stand the sight of each other sometimes. But after all, you're still family. So join Salvo. It's free. Learn all you can about the Scottish Constitution and what we're entitled to by right of law. And don't wait for the lawyers to explain it, because part of what's been done to Scotland is that our lawyers don't learn what the Scottish Constitution is or where it is or what it says. So you learn it. Join the liberation movement. And we will go to the international community and we will force Westminster to give up what it has no right to hold on to. Our country, our nation, on our people.